The last bone she needed was a femur, and she found it half buried in the mud where the eastern border met the river, stripped clean by crows and bleached by 3 weeks of autumn sun. Serafina wiped it against her thigh, leaving a streak of wet earth on the deerskin apron she wore over her wool dress, and held it up to the fading light. Good. Dense. From a large male, judging by the thickness. She tucked it into the canvas sack slung across her back, where it clacked against the others like wind chimes made of death. Her fingers were cracked and bleeding at the knuckles. The cold did that, the October cold that crept up from the river at dusk and settled into the marrow of everything it touched. She had stopped feeling her toes an hour ago. The thin leather boots she wore had a hole in the left sole stuffed with dried grass that had gone damp and useless by midday, and now each step made a wet squelching sound that she had learned to ignore. She was not supposed to be here. The eastern border of the Ashwood Pack territory was forbidden to Omegas, especially Omegas like her, the kind with no wolf, no family name, no place at the hearth fires. But the bones were here, and the bones were all she had. Tomorrow was the gathering. Every pack within 400 miles would send representatives to the Ashwood stronghold, and among them, the Alpha King himself, Cael Draven, the Black Mane, the one they said had killed his own father to take the throne, and hadn't smiled since. Every wolf in the territory was preparing. The warriors polished their armor. The cooks slaughtered pigs. The Beta's daughter Lyssa had spent 3 days having her hair braided with silver thread for the occasion. And Serafina was collecting bones. She made her way back to the workshop the way she always did, through the drainage culvert behind the tannery, past the compost heap that smelled of rotting cabbage and lye, through the gap in the stone wall that was just wide enough for someone as thin as she was. The workshop was not really a workshop. It was the root cellar beneath the old smokehouse, abandoned after the fire 2 years ago, left the upper structure a blackened shell. She had claimed it the way feral cats claim a dry corner, by simply being there so often that no one else bothered. Inside, she lit the tallow candle, the cheap kind that smelled of burnt sheep fat and smoked constantly, and laid the femur on the workbench beside the others. The throne was nearly complete. It stood in the center of the cellar, 5 feet tall at the back, constructed entirely from the bones of fallen wolves. Not wolves she had killed. She had never killed anything larger than a rabbit, and even that had made her cry. These were bones from the border wars, the skirmishes that the Ashwood Pack had fought and won over the past 2 years, leaving their enemies to rot in the no-man's land between territories because Alpha Harkon, the Ashwood leader, considered it beneath his warriors to bury the enemy dead. She had buried them, quietly at night, one by one, whispering the old words her grandmother had taught her before the fever took her. Words that weren't prayers exactly, but weren't not prayers either. And she had kept the bones, not all of them. Just enough. The throne was a project born of fury, which surprised even her, because Serafina had not thought she had any fury left. It had started 6 months ago, the night Alpha Harkon held his victory feast, and dragged her in front of the entire pack to serve as his footrest, literally. He had made her kneel on all fours beside his chair so he could prop his boots on her back while he ate roasted elk and drank mead and told stories about the wolves he had slaughtered at the eastern border. Her knees had bled through her dress onto the stone floor. The pack had laughed. Lyssa, the Beta's daughter, had leaned down and whispered close enough that Serafina could smell the honey wine on her breath. "You should be grateful. At least you're useful for something." That night, Serafina had gone to the root cellar and started building. She didn't have a plan, not really. She didn't know what the throne was for, or what she would do with it. She only knew that her hands needed to make something, and the bones were there, and the Alpha's chair was just a chair, just oak and leather, and the authority of a man who put his feet on a girl's spine. She could build something that made his chair look like kindling. She wired the femur into place with copper thread salvaged from the tannery's waste bin. The seat was formed from a lattice of interlocking ribs. The armrests were ulnas and radii, arranged in a pattern that looked, if you squinted, like wolf heads in profile. The back was the masterpiece, a fan of scapulae, arranged like wings or like the pages of an open book interspersed with vertebrae that formed a column up the center. She had polished every bone with beeswax she had traded for by mending the beekeeper's daughter's torn coat. They gleamed in the candlelight like old ivory. It was morbid. She knew that. A girl with no wolf building a throne from the bones of wolves. There was something wrong with her, probably something that the pack had always sensed and that she had always known. Her grandmother had called it the old way, but her grandmother had been half delirious with fever at the end and spoke of things that made no sense. Silver blood, bone singers, the first wolves, the ones that came before packs and alphas and hierarchies, the ones that were not wolves at all but something older. Seraphina didn't believe in any of it. She believed in copper wire and beeswax, and the satisfying click of a joint fitting into a socket. She worked through the night. By dawn, the throne was finished. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever made, and the most terrible. It caught the first grey light from the cellar's single window, and held it, the bones glowing with a warmth that had no source, and for a moment, just a moment, Seraphina could have sworn she heard something. A low hum like a tuning fork struck against stone, vibrating in her teeth and her fingertips and the hollow space behind her sternum where she had always suspected a wolf should live, but didn't. She shook it off, pressed her bleeding fingers to her apron, climbed the ladder and emerged into the pale morning. The gathering was today. She needed to wash the bone dust from her hair and present herself in the kitchen where she had been assigned to peel turnips for 14 hours straight. Omega work, invisible work, the kind of work that kept the feast running while the warriors strutted and the Alpha made speeches about strength and dominance and the natural order. Seraphina was halfway across the courtyard when Lyssa found her. The Beta's daughter was already dressed for the gathering, her auburn hair gleaming with those silver threads, her dress the color of dark wine, cut to show the mark on her collarbone that she claimed was a blessing from the moon goddess, but which Seraphina knew was a birthmark she had had since childhood. Lyssa was flanked by two of her usual companions, a matched set of she-wolves named Daria and Fen, who existed primarily to agree with whatever Lyssa said. "You smell like a crypt," Lyssa said, wrinkling her nose. "What have you been doing?" Seraphina kept her eyes down. "Walking. Walking." Lyssa repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. "You know the Alpha King arrives at noon. Every Omega is supposed to be in the kitchen by now. You're late." "I'm going there now." Lyssa stepped closer. She was taller than Seraphina, by half a head, broader in the shoulders, healthy and well-fed in the way that people are when they have never gone a day without a full plate. She reached out and plucked something from Seraphina's hair, a sliver of bone, thin as a needle. "What's this?" Seraphina's stomach dropped. "Nothing. A twig." Lyssa held it up to the light, turning it between her manicured fingers. For a moment, something moved behind her eyes, a flicker of curiosity that was almost intelligent, almost genuine. Then it was gone, replaced by the practiced sneer. She flicked the bone sliver into the mud. "Get to the kitchen, and for the goddess's sake, wash. If the Alpha King smells you, he'll think we keep corpses as pets." Dario and Fen laughed on cue. Serafina ducked her head and moved past them, her canvas sack hidden under her cloak, empty now but still smelling of earth and old calcium. She made it to the kitchen, peeled turnips, until her hands were stained orange and reeking of root vegetable, and tried not to think about the throne sitting in the dark beneath the smokehouse. The Alpha King arrived at noon, as promised. Serafina did not see him arrive. She heard it. Everyone heard it. The horn call first, 3 long blasts that rattled the kitchen windows and sent a cascade of dried rosemary falling from the rafters. Then the sound of hooves, dozens of them, and the deeper sound beneath the hooves, the vibration of wolves running in formation, massive wolves, the kind that stood shoulder height to a horse, the Blackmane Guard. The kitchen erupted into controlled chaos. The head cook, a red-faced woman named Berta, began screaming orders with the precision of a field commander. Platters were assembled, wine was decanted, the roast venison was pulled from the spit and carved into portions thin enough to see through. Serafina was assigned to carry water pitchers to the great hall. This was how she ended up standing 6 feet from Alpha King Kael Draven, holding a clay pitcher so heavy her arms trembled and trying very hard not to exist. He was larger than the stories. That was the first thing she noticed. The stories said he was tall and he was 6.5 feet at least, but it was not the height that struck her. It was the density of him, the way he occupied space, as if gravity bent slightly in his direction. His shoulders were broad enough that his leather armor seemed to strain at the seams. His hair was black, truly black, the kind of black that ate light instead of reflecting it, and it fell past his jaw in a way that was either careless or very deliberately so. His face was hard-edged, all planes and angles with a scar that ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, white against his bronze skin. His eyes were the color of molten amber, not golden, not yellow, the specific color of tree resin that has been heated until it liquefies, warm and dark and ancient. He sat in the place of honor at Alpha Harkon's right hand, but he didn't look honored. He looked bored, or possibly angry. With a face like that, it was hard to tell the difference. He held a goblet of wine that he had not sipped. His jaw was set. His eyes moved across the hall with the flat, assessing quality of a predator counting prey. Serafina kept her head down and poured water into the nearest empty cup. Then the wind changed. Later, she would not be able to explain what happened next in terms that made sense. The great hall's windows were open to let in the autumn air, and a gust came through, carrying the smell of wood smoke and pine and the cold iron tang of the river. And it should have carried her scent away from him, dispersed it into the 1,000 other smells of the feast, the roasted meat and spilled wine, and the perfume of 40 she-wolves who had doused themselves in rose oil for the occasion. It didn't. She felt it the way you feel lightning before the strike. A pressure change, the hair on her arms lifting, a sudden warmth in her chest as if someone had pressed a heated stone against her breastbone. Her fingers tightened on the pitcher's handle, and then he was looking at her, not glancing, not noticing, looking. The way a wolf looks at the moon when it first crests the tree line with a fixed, absolute attention that excludes everything else in the visual field. The amber eyes locked onto her and did not move. Serafina stopped breathing. His wolf. She could feel his wolf. She had no wolf of her own, had never felt the presence of another wolf the way pack members described it. That warm rush of recognition, the animal consciousness pressing against the human mind. But she felt his. It slammed into her awareness like a door blown open in a gale, massive and dark and vibrating, with a sound that was not a sound but a frequency, a resonance, the same hum she had felt in the root cellar when the throne was finished. Mine. The word came from nowhere and everywhere. It was not spoken aloud. It did not need to be. It existed in the space between them like heat shimmer on pavement, distorting everything else in the room into irrelevance. Alpha King Kael Draven set down his goblet. The motion was very slow and very precise, the way a man moves when every instinct he possesses is screaming at him to do something violent, and he is choosing with great effort not to. He stood. The entire hall went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when the most powerful wolf in the known world rises from his chair at a feast, and everyone understands on some deep cellular level that something is happening that they do not want to be in the way of. "Who is that?" His voice was low and rough, like gravel dragged across slate. He was not asking the room. He was asking Alpha Harken, who sat to his left, with a goblet frozen halfway to his lips. "Who?" "Your Majesty." The girl. With the pitcher. Harken's eyes found Seraphina. His expression cycled through confusion, irritation, and something that might have been alarm. "She's no one. An Omega. She doesn't even have a wolf." "Her name?" It's Sarah something. She works in the kitchen." Kael Draven stepped away from the table. The warriors flanking him tensed. He didn't seem to notice. He walked toward Seraphina with the unhurried gait of something that has never been required to rush, because nothing in its environment is capable of posing a threat. She should run. She knew she should run. But her feet were rooted to the stone floor, and the warmth in her chest was expanding, pressing against her ribs, and his wolf was so close now that she could almost see it, a shadow behind his eyes, enormous and dark-furred, and utterly focused on her. He stopped 2 feet away. This close, she could smell him. Cedar. Black pepper. Something metallic that might have been steel or might have been blood. And underneath all of it, something she had no name for, something that smelled the way the color amber looked, warm and deep and impossibly old. "Look at me." She couldn't. Her hands were shaking so badly the water in the pitcher was trembling. "Look at me." She raised her eyes. The moment their gazes met, the hum became a roar. She felt it in her teeth, her spine, the bottoms of her feet. The pitcher slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone floor, and she barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. His eyes widened, just slightly, just enough for her to see something she did not expect in the face of the most feared alpha alive. Wonder. Naked, helpless wonder, the expression of a man who has searched for something his entire life, and just found it in the last place he would have thought to look. "What's your name?" His voice was different now, still rough, but quieter. A private voice. "Seraphina." "Seraphina." He repeated it the way some people repeat a word in a foreign language, carefully learning the shape of it. "Who did this to your hands?" She looked down. Her hands were still cracked and bleeding at the knuckles, the skin orange-stained from turnips, the nails broken and dirty. She curled them into fists. "No one." "Don't lie to me." There was no threat in it, just certainty. The certainty of a man who can hear a heartbeat change when someone speaks an untruth. "I did it to myself. Working." Something shifted in his face. The wonder was still there, but now it was joined by something harder, something that made the scar on his face stand out white against a sudden flush of color. He turned to Harken. You put my mate to work, peeling vegetables. The silence, already absolute, somehow deepened. Seraphina felt the blood drain from her face. Mate. He had said mate. The word hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle, impossible to ignore, impossible to take back. Harken stood, his chair scraped against the floor. Your Majesty, that's impossible. She has no wolf. She's the lowest Omega in the pack. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake. She's wolfless. She can't even shift. Whatever you're sensing, it must be Alpha Harken. The name was spoken so quietly that only those nearest heard it, but the effect was as if he had shouted. Harken flinched. I have waited 32 years for the goddess to show me my mate. I know what I'm sensing. The only question I have for you is why my mate is bleeding from the hands and dressed in rags in your territory. Harken opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted to his baiter, a thick-necked man named Corrigan, who was doing an admirable impersonation of a wall fixture. Lyssa, in her wine-red dress, with her silver-threaded hair, was staring at Seraphina with an expression that Seraphina couldn't read and didn't want to. She's an orphan, Harken said finally. She has no family, no lineage. She was assigned Omega duties because she has no wolf. It's the natural order. The natural order. Kyle repeated the phrase without inflection. She's bleeding. Omegas work. That's what they do. With respect, Your Majesty, you can't possibly expect. I expect, Kyle said, that when I return to this hall in 1 hour, my mate will have been bathed, clothed, fed, and given a room with a fire. Is that clear, or would you like me to be more specific? He did not wait for an answer. He turned back to Seraphina, and the hardness drained out of his face so quickly it was almost disorienting, like watching a statue become human between one breath and the next. I'm going to touch your hand now. Is that all right? She stared at him. No one had asked her permission for anything in years. Not to take her food, not to push her, not to make her a footrest. The question itself was so alien that she almost didn't understand it. Yes. He took her right hand gently, with a care that seemed impossible for hands that large. His fingers were warm and calloused, and they closed around hers with a steadiness that made something inside her chest crack open, not painfully, but the way ice cracks in spring when the river starts to run again. You're safe now, he said it simply. Not a promise, not a declaration. A fact. The way someone might say, the sun is up, or the river flows south. Then he released her hand and walked out of the great hall, his black mane guard falling into formation behind him, and Seraphina stood in the wreckage of a shattered water pitcher and tried to remember how to breathe. Lyssa reached her first. You. Come with me. Seraphina followed because she did not know what else to do. Lyssa led her through the corridors at a pace that suggested fury held tightly on a leash past the kitchens, where Berta and the cook staff watched with open mouths up the back stairs to the guest wing that had been prepared for visiting dignitaries. Lyssa opened a door to a room that was larger than Seraphina's root cellar 10 times over. A fire burned in the hearth. A copper bathtub steamed in the corner, already filled. Clean clothes were laid out on the bed, a deep blue dress, and a wool cloak lined with rabbit fur. Bathe, Lyssa said. I'll send someone for your measurements for proper clothes. Seraphina stood in the doorway. Why are you doing this? Lyssa's jaw tightened. For a moment, something broke through the polished surface of her composure. Not cruelty this time, but something more complicated. Fear, maybe, or the particular shame of a person who has just realized in front of everyone that the girl they used as a punchline has more value than they ever imagined. Because the Alpha King told my father you're his mate, and if you're not bathed and dressed in an hour, it won't be you he punishes." She turned to leave. Paused. Without looking back, she said very quietly, "The hot water is better if you add the lavender oil. The one in the blue bottle. Not the white one. The white one is for horses." Then she was gone. Serafina locked the door, stared at the room, stared at the fire, the bath, the clothes. Then she sat on the floor beside the door and pressed her bleeding hands to her face and shook. Not crying. Not yet. Just shaking the way a body shakes when it has been clenched for so long that the act of unclenching is its own kind of violence. She bathed. The water was almost too hot, and the heat found every crack in her skin and every bruise on her body, and made them sing with a pain that was paradoxically comforting. Real pain. Clean pain. Not the dull ache of cold and hunger, but the sharp, bright pain of healing. She used the lavender oil, the blue bottle. When she looked at herself in the copper mirror above the washstand, she almost didn't recognize the face looking back. Without the bone dust and the kitchen grease and the permanent squint of someone bracing for a blow, she was not beautiful, she thought, but present, visible, like a drawing that someone had finally finished inking. Her eyes were strange. She had always known that. Too pale, almost silver in a face that was otherwise dark. Dark hair, dark brows, olive skin. Her grandmother had had those eyes too. "Silver blood," the old woman had whispered. "Don't let them see." Serafina had never known what that meant. She had assumed it was the fever talking. She put on the blue dress. It was too large in the shoulders and too long in the hem, clearly designed for someone of Lissa's build, but it was clean and warm and didn't have holes in it, and when she ran her hands over the fabric, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she had almost forgotten the word for it. Dignity. She was sitting by the fire, trying to comb the tangles from her wet hair with her fingers when the knock came. She opened the door expecting Lissa or possibly a servant. It was him. Cole Draven stood in the corridor, still in his battle leathers, still massive, still radiating that gravitational pull that made the air feel thicker. But he had removed his gauntlets, and his hands were bare, and he was holding a wooden comb. "I noticed you didn't have one." She took it. Their fingers brushed. The hum returned, not as violent as before, but steady, a bass note vibrating beneath everything. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. He entered the room and immediately made it feel half its actual size. He looked at the fire, the bath, the untouched plate of bread and cheese that someone had left on the table. "You haven't eaten." "I wasn't hungry." He looked at her. That amber gaze, steady and warm, and she was beginning to realize extraordinarily patient. "When was the last time you ate Serafina?" The way he said her name, as if it mattered, as if the syllables themselves were worth taking care with. "Yesterday. There was bread." Something moved in his jaw, a muscle tightening. The wolf, she thought. The wolf didn't like that answer. "Eat. Please." She sat at the table and ate because she was in fact starving, and because he had said please, and because no one in her memory had ever used that word with her before. The bread was fresh, soft in the center, with a crust that crackled when she tore it. The cheese was sharp and crumbly, and tasted like salt and grass. She ate all of it while he stood by the fire and watched the flames, and did not watch her, giving her the privacy of not being observed while she ate with the desperation of someone who hadn't had enough for a very long time. When she finished, he spoke without turning. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without running. Can you do that?" "I don't know." The honesty seemed to surprise him. A flicker at the corner of his mouth that might have been, in another life, a smile. "The mate bond is real. You can feel it. I know you can, because I can feel that you feel it." He turned from the fire. "I am not going to force anything. I'm not going to mark you or claim you without your consent. But I need you to understand that I am not leaving this territory without you. That is not negotiable. Why? Because you're mine. You don't know me. I know that you were bleeding and no one cared. I know that you've been starving and no one fed you. I know that whatever Harkon's pack has done to you, it ends today. And I know," he paused, frowned slightly, "I know that there's something in you that I've never felt in another wolf. Something old." Her stomach tightened. "I don't have a wolf. I know what they told you." He stepped closer, not crowding her, approaching the way one approaches a wounded animal with slow deliberation. "I also know what I felt when I looked at you. That wasn't the absence of a wolf, Serafina. That was the presence of something so powerful it doesn't need to show itself." She thought of the throne, the hum, the bones glowing in the candlelight. "You're wrong," she said, but her voice cracked on the second word. "I'm not. But you don't need to believe me yet." He crossed to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "The gathering feast continues tonight. You'll sit beside me. Not in the kitchen, not on the floor. Beside me. At the high table." His eyes found hers. "I'd like you to understand what that means in the politics of the packs. But honestly, I don't care if you understand it or not. You'll be there because that's where you belong." He left. His footsteps faded down the corridor, heavy and even and certain. Serafina sat at the table for a long time. Then she combed her hair with the wooden comb. It had been carved, she noticed, from applewood. The handle had a wolf etched into it, tiny and precise, the kind of detail that suggested someone had made it by hand, slowly and with care. She wondered if it was his. The feast that night was a different country from the afternoons. Serafina entered the great hall on legs that felt made of water and air instead of bone and muscle, wearing the blue dress with the too long hem that she had pinned up with a thorn from the hedge outside her window. Every eye in the hall found her and held. Kyle was already seated at the high table. He rose when he saw her, and the simple act of a king standing for an omega sent a murmur through the assembled wolves like wind through tall grass. The chair beside him was empty. He pulled it out for her. She sat. The wood was warm from the fire. The plate in front of her was already filled with roasted pheasant and honeyed carrots, and bread so fresh the steam still curled from the crust. A goblet of wine stood beside the plate, deep red and smelling of blackberry and oak. "Eat," he said again, and this time the word was not a request, but an act of war, because making an omega eat from the Alpha King's table was a declaration that every wolf in the room understood. Alpha Harkon sat 3 seats down his face, arranged into careful neutrality. His beta Corrigan had the look of a man trying to solve a math problem that kept changing its variables. Lissa sat beside her father, her spine very straight, her silver-threaded hair catching the firelight. Serafina ate. The pheasant was tender and peppered with rosemary, and the carrots dissolved on her tongue into something sweet and earthy, and she had to consciously slow herself down because the food was so good it made her eyes water. Kyle ate beside her in silence. Occasionally his hand would brush hers when he reached for the bread, and each time the contact sent that warm hum racing through her, not unpleasant, not frightening, just present a reminder that something fundamental had changed in the architecture of her existence. After the main course, Lycan stood to give a toast. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept sliding to Seraphina, and then away like a tongue probing a sore tooth. "To the Alpha King," Lycan said, raising his goblet, "and to the continued alliance between Ashwood and the Crown." "To alliances?" Kyle said and drank, and the flatness of his tone suggested that this particular alliance was under review. The music started. Drums and fiddles and a bone flute, played by an old man in the corner, who was either very drunk or very talented, possibly both. Wolves began to dance. The floor cleared. The fire roared. A young warrior from the Black Main Guard, a lean, sharp-faced man with a shaved head and tattoos running up his neck, appeared beside Kyle's chair and leaned down to murmur something. Kyle nodded, stood and looked at Seraphina. "I need to attend to something. It won't take long. Stay here." The command was gentle, but absolute. She nodded. He left with his warrior disappearing through the side door into the corridor beyond. The moment he was gone, the air changed. It was subtle, not a shift in temperature or sound, but a shift in attention, the way a room of predators recalibrates when the apex predator leaves. Eyes that had been carefully averted now found Seraphina with a directness that made the skin between her shoulder blades prickle. Lycan was the first to move. He rose from his seat and approached her with a smile that did not extend beyond his teeth. "Enjoying the feast, Omega?" She kept her voice neutral. "Yes, Alpha." "Good, good." He rested a hand on the back of her chair. His fingers were thick and the nails were yellowed, and he was close enough that she could smell the sour wine on his breath. "You know, there's been a mistake, a confusion. The Alpha King has been traveling for weeks, and sometimes the mate bond can be misidentified, triggered by proximity and nothing more." He seemed certain. "He's young, impetuous. He'll realize his error soon enough." Lycan leaned closer. "And when he does, you'll be right back in the kitchen where you belong. Unless, of course, you make this easy. Come with me now quietly, and I'll send word that you've chosen to withdraw the claim." "I didn't make a claim." "He did." Lycan's smile hardened. "You're a wolfless orphan who peels turnips. Whatever you think is happening, it isn't. The Alpha King will not make a queen out of something like you." "Something like you." The words landed where they always landed, in the soft place beneath her ribs, where every insult had been stored since she was 6 years old, and first learned that her place in the world was approximately equal to the value of the floor she was standing on. But for the first time, the words bounced. "He told me to stay," Seraphina said. "So I'm staying." Lycan's hand moved from the chair to her shoulder. His grip tightened. "I gave you a chance to—" "Remove your hand." The voice came from behind Lycan, and it was not Kyle's. It was deeper if that was possible, and it carried a vibration that Seraphina felt in the stone beneath her feet. She turned. A woman stood in the doorway to the great hall. She was tall, nearly as tall as Kyle, with iron-grey hair cut short against her skull, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains visible through the hall's windows. She wore the black mane leathers and carried a staff of dark wood, capped with silver. "Commander Osher," Lycan said, and to his credit, his voice barely wavered. "I was just— Remove your hand from the king's mate, or I will remove your hand from your wrist." Lycan removed his hand. Commander Asher crossed the hall in 5 long strides and positioned herself behind Seraphina's chair like a watchtower. She did not sit. She did not speak further. She simply stood there 6 feet of lethal competence, and the hall exhaled, and Harkin retreated to his seat, and Seraphina's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her eyeballs. Kyle returned minutes later. His gaze found Seraphina first, then Asha, then Harkin. A conversation happened in silence, conducted entirely through the language of wolf hierarchy, and whatever was said, Harkin did not approach Seraphina again. The feast wound down. Wolves drifted into the night. Kyle walked her to her room, his hand at the small of her back, a point of warmth that she was acutely aware of with every step. At the door he paused. "What did Harkin say to you?" She considered lying, decided she was tired of protecting people who had never protected her. "He said you were confused, that the bond was a mistake. He wanted me to withdraw." The amber eyes went dark, not a color change, but a quality change, as if something behind the iris had shifted forward, pressing against the surface. "And what did you say?" "I said you told me to stay." That almost smile again. "Good." He stepped back. "Lock your door tonight, Seraphina. Against what? Against anything that isn't me." He left. She locked the door. She stood with her forehead pressed against the wood and breathed in the fading scent of cedar and black pepper, and the bone in her chest that she had broken open when he first touched her hand began very slowly to knit itself back together. She couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. That was part of it. After years of sleeping on the cellar floor or, on good nights, the pallet in the kitchen corner that she shared with the Mouser cat, the feather mattress felt like drowning. But the real reason she couldn't sleep was the throne. It was still down there, in the root cellar, under the burned-out smokehouse. Her throne of bones glowing faintly in the dark, humming its strange low hum waiting. If Harkin found it, or if anyone found it, they would destroy it and they would destroy her for building it, mate bond or not. A wolfless Omega constructing a throne from the bones of fallen warriors was not just strange. It was blasphemy. The bones were supposed to return to the earth, to feed the soil that fed the pack, taking them, shaping them, arranging them into a seat of power that was the kind of thing that got people burned in the old days. She had to move it, hide it. Something. She slipped out of bed, put on her old boots, the ones with the hole in the left sole, wrapped herself in the rabbit fur cloak, unlocked the door and listened. The corridor was empty. She moved through the stronghold, the way she had always moved along the walls through the shadows, invisible the way Omegas learn to be invisible because visibility means targeting. Down the back stairs, through the kitchen, where the fire had burned to embers and the smell of roasted pheasant had turned to cold grease. Out the service door into the courtyard. The night was clear and bitter. Frost glittered on the flagstones. The moon was full fat, and silver casting shadows so sharp they looked solid. She was halfway to the smokehouse when she realized she was not alone. He was standing at the edge of the courtyard, where the flagstones met the grass hands behind his back face, tipped up toward the moon. He had removed his armor and wore only a linen shirt and trousers, and in the moonlight his scar was invisible, and he looked almost young. Kyle turned his head. "I asked you to lock your door." "I did, and then I unlocked it." "That's not quite what I meant." "I know." He studied her. The cloak, the old boots, the direction she had been heading. "Where are you going?" She could lie. She was good at lying. Years of practice, years of hiding scraps of food under her palate and pretending she wasn't hungry, years of explaining away bruises as clumsiness. But the bond was there between them, that warm, humming thread, and she could feel it registering her heartbeat. her breath the micro-tensions of deception. He would know. "There's something I need to show you," she said, and the words surprised her, because she had never voluntarily shown anyone anything that mattered. He fell into step beside her. They crossed the courtyard in silence, their breath pluming white in the cold air. She led him past the tannery, past the compost heap, through the gap in the wall, to the blackened shell of the smokehouse. "In there," she said, and opened the cellar door. The glow was visible from the top of the ladder, faint bone-white, pulsing with that low hum that she now realized she had been hearing her entire life, so constant and so quiet that she had mistaken it for silence. Kyle descended first. She followed. He stood in the center of the cellar and looked at the throne, and he did not speak for a very long time. It was more beautiful by moonlight than by candlelight. The bones glowed with their own luminescence, a cool silver white that cast no shadows, and the hum was louder here, resonant, vibrating in the earthen walls and the timber beams overhead. The scapulae fanned out at the top like wings made of moonstone. The vertebrae along the central column seemed to pulse, each one brightening and dimming in sequence, a heartbeat made visible. "You built this," Kyle said. "Not a question." "Yes. From the border dead. I buried them first, said the words, then I kept the bones. The old words, the bone singer's words." She looked at him sharply. "How do you know that—" He turned to face her. In the throne's light, his eyes were not amber, but silver, reflecting the glow. And for a moment, he looked like something out of a myth. A wolf god standing in a sacred place he had not expected to find in the root cellar of a second-rate pack. "My grandmother was a bone singer," he said. "The last one. Or so I thought." The world tilted. Serafina braced herself against the workbench. "That's not... I'm not. You built a throne from the bones of the dead, and the bones are singing. Look at them, Serafina. That's not copper wire and beeswax doing that." She looked. He was right. The glow was intensifying. The hum was rising in pitch, no longer a bass vibration, but a chord complex, and layered as if the bones themselves were harmonizing. "Bone singers were the first wolves," Kyle said. His voice had the quality of someone reciting something they had memorized long ago. "Before alphas, before packs, before the hierarchy. They spoke to the dead. They built altars from the fallen. They could call a wolf from nothing, from bone and will, and the old words, and the wolf would come. I don't have a wolf. You have something older than a wolf." He stepped toward the throne, reached out. His fingers hovered an inch from the backrest. "May I?" She nodded, not knowing what she was giving permission for. He touched the throne. The hum became a roar. The light flared bright enough to cast their shadows huge and sharp against the cellar walls, and Serafina gasped because she felt the touch, as if his fingers were on her skin instead of on the bone, a connection so intimate it made her stagger. Kyle pulled his hand back. His breathing had changed. Faster. Rougher. "This is a seat of power," he said. "A real one, not a symbol, not a metaphor. You built a functional seat of power from the bones of the dead, and it is alive, and it is bonded to you." He looked at her. "Do you understand what that means?" "No." "It means you're not an Omega Serafina. You never were. Bone singers were queens. They sat at the center of every pack, and the pack existed around them, because they were the ones who kept the dead at peace and the living in balance. When the bone singers died out, the alphas rose. We're the substitute, the replacement. We've been running the packs with brute force for 600 years, because the people who were supposed to run them with something better were gone. That's... No. My grandmother was a sick old woman who talked about silver blood and— Your grandmother was the last bone singer of the Ashwood line, and Harkon's grandfather killed her line and took the territory. Everything except you. The words landed in her chest like stones, dropped into still water, sinking deep, displacing something, sending ripples outward. How do you know that? Because my grandmother told me before she died. She said, "The Ashwood singer is still alive, hidden in the pack that killed her family, building something out of bones." I thought it was delirium. I thought she was confused. His voice dropped. I came to this gathering looking for an alliance. I found my mate. I found the last bone singer. I found— He looked at the throne. This. Serafina sank onto the cellar floor. The earth was cold through the thin dress. The throne's glow had settled back to a steady pulse, gentle now, patient, the way a fire burns after the initial flare. I can't be what you're saying I am. You already are. The throne is proof. The throne is bones and wire and beeswax. The throne is glowing. She had no argument for that. He crouched beside her. At this level his eyes were at the same height as hers, and the power imbalance that she had felt since the moment he stood in the great hall was for this one moment equalized. "I am the Alpha King," he said. "I have 700 warriors, 3 fortified cities, and enough political power to reshape the map of every pack territory from here to the coast. And I am telling you that when I touched that throne, I felt something stronger than anything my wolf has ever produced. You built that with your bare hands, in a cellar, while starving." Her eyes burned. Not tears. Bone singers didn't cry, apparently. The burning was something else, something behind the eyes, a pressure building. "I don't know how to be what you need me to be. I need you to be exactly what you are. A woman who buries the enemy dead and says the old words and builds impossible things out of scraps. That's who I want beside me. That's who the packs need." He stood, offered her his hand. She took it, and the hum gentled, and she rose. They stood together in the glowing cellar, the throne between them and the night above them. And something settled into place that had been displaced for a very long time. Then the cellar door opened, and Corrigan the Beta was standing at the top of the ladder with a torch and a look of absolute horror on his face. "Alpha Harkon!" Corrigan shouted into the night behind him. "You need to see this." What happened next happened fast. Harkon arrived with 6 warriors. They descended into the cellar like water pouring into a drain, filling the small space with the stink of torchlight and sweat and aggression. Harkon took one look at the throne, and his face went the color of old ash. "Bonecraft," he breathed. "In my territory. Alpha Harkon." Kyle said, his voice perfectly level. "This is not your concern. Not my concern. She's been building an abomination under my stronghold, using the bones of wolves. This is heresy. This is a bone singer's throne." The cellar went very quiet. The warriors looked at each other. Corrigan's torch hand was shaking. Harkon's face cycled through a series of expressions, landing finally on something that Serafina recognized, not anger, but fear. Deep structural fear, the kind that comes from a family secret, threatening to surface. "There are no more bone singers," Harkon said. "They died out centuries ago." "Your grandfather made sure of that," Kyle said. "Didn't he?" Harkon flinched. It was slight, barely visible, but Serafina caught it, and she understood in that moment that Harkon had always known. Not the specifics, maybe. Not her grandmother's name or the details of what had been done, but the general shape of it. The buried truth. He had known there was something wrong about the wolfless orphan girl his pack kept in the cellar, something that made his wolf uneasy, and he had dealt with that unease the way his grandfather had, by burying it under cruelty and hoping it stayed buried. This has nothing to do with... It has everything to do with it. The Ashwood Bone Singer line was murdered to make room for your bloodline's claim on this territory. The last survivor has been living in your pack as an Omega for 20 years, building a throne from the bones of the dead, and the throne is alive, Harkin. Look at it. It's alive. Every eye in the cellar turned to the throne. It pulsed. The hum rose, not threatening but undeniable. The bones glowed with that steady silver light, and several of the warriors took an involuntary step backward. "The abomination needs to be destroyed," Harkin said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "And the girl is my mate, and the rightful bone singer of the Ashwood territory. And if you finish that sentence, I will finish you." Kyle did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The wolf was in every syllable, the massive dark presence that Seraphina had felt in the great hall, and in this small space it was suffocating a pressure that made the torchlight gutter and the warriors' wolves whimper inside their human skins. Harkin held his ground for 3 seconds. 5, 7. Then his shoulders rounded just slightly, and his chin dipped just slightly, and every wolf in the cellar saw the submission for what it was. All except Corrigan. The beta moved with the speed of a man who has been planning something for a while. He dropped his torch, lunged past Harkin, and grabbed Seraphina by the throat. His fingers were thick and calloused, and they closed around her windpipe with practiced efficiency, cutting off her air. "This thing killed my brother," Corrigan snarled. "Her grandmother cursed our bloodline. My brother died on the eastern border because of bone singer magic, and I will not..." What Seraphina did next was not conscious. It was not planned. It was the response of a body that has been pushed to the absolute limit of what it can endure and discovers in that moment that the limit was never the actual boundary, just the place where the ordinary ended and something else began. She put her hand on Corrigan's wrist, and the hum came through her. Not from the throne this time. From her. From the silver blood that her grandmother had spoken of, the blood that wasn't blood at all, but something older, a current, a frequency, the original language of the wolves before they were wolves, when they were just bone and spirit, and the will to protect. Corrigan screamed. Not in pain, in recognition. His wolf, buried deep inside his human skin, suddenly felt the presence of something it had been bred to obey something from before the hierarchies, and the territories, and the wars, and it dropped to its belly like a pup before its mother. His hand fell from her throat. He collapsed to his knees. His eyes were wide and glassy, and his mouth moved without sound. The cellar was silent. Seraphina's hand was glowing. A faint silver light traced the veins beneath her skin from her fingertips to her wrist, to the crook of her elbow, a map of silver blood made visible, pulsing with that same steady rhythm as the throne. "Well," said Commander Asha from the top of the ladder, where she had apparently been standing for some time, staff in hand, watching the proceedings with the expression of someone observing a moderately interesting chess match. That was informative. Kyle moved then. Fast. Faster than a man his size should be able to move. He had Corrigan by the back of the neck, before the beta could recover, lifting him off his knees and pressing him face first into the earthen wall with one hand. "You touched her." The words were barely human. The wolf was speaking now. The real wolf, the one that Seraphina could feel, vibrating behind Kaelo's ribs like a caged thunderstorm. "You put your hand on her throat." "Kyle." She said his name without thinking, without the title, just the name, and the wolf heard it, and paused, and the grip on Corrigan's neck loosened by a fraction. "He's not worth it," she said. "Not now." Kyle looked at her over his shoulder. The amber eyes were almost entirely gold. The pupils contracted to slits the wolf so close to the surface that she could see the shadow of it in his jawline, in the way his teeth were slightly too long. "He touched you." "I know." And I stopped him. The simple truth of it hung in the air. She had stopped him. Not Kale. Not a warrior. The wolfless Omega who peeled turnips had put her hand on a beta's wrist and brought him to his knees. Kyle released Corrigan. The beta slid down the wall and stayed there, curled in on himself, shaking. "Everyone out," Kale said. "Now." They went. Harkin first, then his warriors, then Corrigan, half carried by two of his men. Asher descended the ladder, surveyed the cellar one final time, and left with a nod to Seraphina that carried more respect than any words could have. They were alone with the throne. Kale's breathing was ragged. The wolf was still close to the surface, still pressing, still furious. Seraphina could feel it through the bond, a hot, dark, protective rage that had nowhere to go now that the threat was removed. She reached up and placed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. The heartbeat was wild, a drum being struck by a frantic hand. "I'm here," she said. "I'm fine. Breathe." He breathed. She felt the wolf recede, not disappearing but retreating, settling back into the deep place where it lived, calmed by the silver-threaded hum that passed from her palm into his skin. His hand came up and covered hers, pressed it tighter against his chest. "I am going to take you from this place," he said. "Tomorrow. We leave at dawn. You come with me to the Blackmane territory, to my home, and you never step foot in this cellar again. The throne comes with us. It's heavy. It's made of bone. It's alive. I know. We'll carry it. I have 700 warriors with nothing better to do." She almost laughed. Almost. The sound that came out was closer to a hiccup, a compressed thing that was part relief and part disbelief, and part the accumulated weight of 20 years of silence finally cracking. "Why are you doing this? You could have any mate, any Luna, someone with a wolf, someone with a name, someone who... I have waited 32 years. He said it plainly, without drama. 32 years, Seraphina. Do you know what that's like for an alpha? To feel the bond space empty every day, every night, year after year, while your wolf goes mad, waiting. I stopped sleeping through the night when I was 19. I stopped hoping when I was 25. I came to this gathering because my council told me I had to for politics, for alliances, for the good of the pack. I didn't come looking for you." His voice cracked on the last word, a hairline fracture in the granite of his composure. "But I found you, and you were starving, and you were bleeding, and you were building the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen out of the bones of the dead in a cellar." His hand tightened over hers. "I don't want any mate. I want the one who builds thrones in the dark." Dawn came grey and cold. The Blackmane Guard assembled in the courtyard. Before the sun had cleared the tree line, their wolves huge and dark at their sides, their armor catching the first weak light. The bone throne stood in the center of the formation, loaded onto a flatbed cart lined with furs. Its silver glow dimmed in the daylight, but still visible, still pulsing an artifact that every wolf who passed it gave a wide, respectful berth. Seraphina stood beside the cart in a traveling cloak of Blackmane grey, lined with wolf fur, a gift from Orsha that fit her perfectly and smelled of pine resin and clean leather. Her old boots had been replaced with new ones, soft and well-fitted with no holes. Her hair was braided back from her face, in a style that Asher had done for her that morning, silently, with the efficiency of someone who has braided 1,000 heads of hair and knows exactly where the pins go. Harkon watched from the steps of the stronghold. He did not come down, but Lyssa did. The Beta's daughter crossed the courtyard alone, without her usual companions, without her silver-threaded hair and wine-dark dress. She wore a plain wool dress, and her hair was down, and she looked for the first time since Seraphina had known her ordinary, human, young. She stopped in front of Seraphina, opened her mouth, closed it. Then she held out a small bundle wrapped in linen. Seraphina unwrapped it. Inside was a pot of salve, the good kind, the kind made with comfrey and lanolin, that cost more than an Omega's weekly rations, the kind for healing cracked hands. "For the road," Lyssa said. She did not look at Seraphina when she said it. She was looking at the bone throne, and her expression was complicated, in a way that Seraphina would think about for a long time afterward, because it contained, alongside the fear and the resentment, a thin seam of something that looked like wonder. Not at the throne, at the girl who had built it. "I knew," Lyssa said quietly, "that you were different. I could always feel it when I was near you, something under your skin that made my wolf want to tuck its tail. I thought it meant you were cursed. I was cruel, because your presence made me afraid." She swallowed. "I am not asking for forgiveness." "Good," Seraphina said, "because I'm not offering it." Lyssa nodded, turned, walked back toward the stronghold. Halfway there she stopped and said, without turning around, "The lavender oil. You used it." "I did." A pause. "Good." She went inside. Kyle appeared beside Seraphina. He looked at the salve in her hands, then at Lyssa's retreating back then, at Seraphina. "Ready?" "No." "Good. Neither am I." They rode out of Ashwood territory as the sun crested the mountains. Kyle rode at the front of the column, massive on his warhorse, his black mane guard, flanking the cart that carried the throne. Seraphina rode beside him on a grey mare that Asher had selected for its temperament, steady and calm and unimpressed by the wolves running alongside. The road to Blackmane territory took 3 days. 3 days of riding through forests turning gold and crimson, with autumn, through valleys where the mist pooled like spilled milk, through mountain passes where the wind was sharp enough to cut. 3 days of sleeping in camp surrounded by warriors who treated her with a careful deference that she did not know what to do with. 3 days of sitting beside Kyle at the fire while he told her about his territory, his stronghold, his people in the plain, factual way of a man who is not trying to impress, but simply sharing what is his, because it is about to be hers too. She learned that Blackmane territory was the largest in the north, spanning from the Iron Mountains to the coast. She learned that his stronghold was built into the side of a cliff overlooking a harbour where the trading ships came in from the southern kingdoms. She learned that his wolf was named Fenris, which was a terrible name for a wolf, like naming a cat, Tiger. But Kyle said it with such matter-of-fact dignity that she didn't have the heart to tell him. She learned that he had a library. She learned that he had a forge where he made things with his hands when the insomnia got bad. Small things, precise things like the applewood comb he had given her. She learned that he was lonely, not in the way of a man who lacks company, because a king is never lacking for company, but in the way of a man whose company never lacks the performance of deference, so he can never be sure if the person beside him is being real or being careful. Loneliness not of absence, but of doubt. On the second night, after the camp was quiet, and the fire had burned to coals, she asked the question she had been carrying since the cellar. What happens when we arrive? You meet the pack, and I introduce you as my mate. And then we figure it out. Together. That's not much of a plan. I'm making it up as I go. The Alpha King doesn't have a plan. The Alpha King has a plan for war, for diplomacy, for resource allocation and border disputes and trade negotiations. The Alpha King does not have a plan for what to do when the woman he's been waiting for his entire life turns out to be a bone witch who builds furniture from dead people. The laugh surprised her. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had forgotten existed, and it was not pretty or polished, but raw and slightly hysterical, and exactly right. He watched her laugh with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of happiness. Not smiling, not quite, but the scar going soft, and the amber eyes going warm, and the wolf behind them going very, very still, the way a predator goes, still. Not when it is hunting, but when it has found the place it wants to stay. You should do that more often, he said. Laugh. Yes. Give me reasons. I'm working on it. They arrived at Blackmen on the morning of the third day, and the stronghold was everything he had described, and nothing she had been prepared for. It was built from dark stone, almost black, cut from the cliff face itself, so that the fortress seemed to grow out of the mountain rather than sit upon it. Towers rose like stalagmites, their windows narrow and golden with firelight even in the morning. The harbour below was a crescent of deep blue water, where fishing boats and trading vessels rocked at anchor. The air smelled of salt and pine and cold stone and wood smoke, and seabirds wheeled overhead, calling to each other in voices that sounded like arguments. The pack was assembled in the main courtyard. 300 wolves and their families, standing in formation, their breath pluming white, their eyes fixed on the column approaching up the mountain road. Kyle dismounted, helped Seraphina down from her mare. His hand lingered at her waist. Stay beside me. She did. He walked her through the assembled pack, and every wolf they passed dipped their chin, the black mane, salute, a gesture of respect offered to the Alpha, and, by extension, to the person at his side. Seraphina felt their eyes, felt the curiosity, and the suspicion, and the measuring quality of a pack evaluating a new member, and she kept her spine straight, and her eyes forward, and her hands still cracked, but healing under Lissa's salve folded in front of her. The throne was unloaded from the cart and carried into the great hall by 8 warriors who handled it with the careful reverence of men moving a sacred object. It was placed on the dais beside Kael's chair, an enormous thing of dark wood and iron that looked next to the bone throne like exactly what it was. A chair. The bone throne was something else, entirely. In the great hall, with the firelight playing across its surface, and the morning light streaming through the high windows, it seemed to breathe. The bones glowed with a deeper warmth than they had in the cellar, as if the throne was responding to the presence of more wolves, more life, more of the raw material it had been built to harmonize with. The pack stared. Kyle stood before them, Seraphina beside him, and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. This is Seraphina. She is my fated mate. She is a bone singer, the last of her line, and she built the throne you see behind me with her own hands. Murmurs, shifting, the particular sound of 300 people trying to process information that does not fit into any existing category. In the old days, Kael continued, the bone singer sat at the center of every pack. She was not the alpha. She was not the Luna. She was the one who kept the balance, who spoke for the dead, who held the pack together, not through strength, but through something older and deeper and more necessary. He paused, looked at Seraphina. Then, without ceremony, without ritual, without any of the elaborate protocols that usually attended, Royal, claiming the Alpha King of the Black Mane territory, dropped to one knee. In front of his entire pack, the murmurs stopped. The silence was so complete that Seraphina could hear the seabirds outside and the crackle of the fire, and beneath both the steady hum of the throne. "I am asking you," Kyle said, looking up at her from his knees, "to take the seat." What? Take the seat. The throne. It's yours. It's always been yours. And if you sit in it, in front of my pack, they will understand what I already know. That you are not an Omega, and you are not a Queen, and you are not a Luna. You are the thing that all of those titles were trying to replace. Kyle, I can't just... You built it in a cellar while starving. You can sit in it in a great hall with a full stomach. She looked at the throne. It pulsed. The hum rose not in volume, but in complexity, adding harmonics, adding layers, as if it were tuning itself to the room, to the pack, to the 300 beating hearts surrounding it. She thought about the root cellar, the tallow candle, the smell of sheep fat and old earth. She thought about her bleeding hands, and the copper wire and the beeswax, and the hours, hundreds of hours spent alone in the dark building, something she couldn't explain for reasons she didn't understand. She had built it angry. She had built it grieving. She had built it because the Alpha had put his feet on her spine, and a girl with silver-threaded hair had told her to be grateful, and because the bones of the dead deserved better than mud and crows, and because her grandmother had whispered words that were not prayers, but weren't not prayers, and because somewhere inside her, in the hollow space where a wolf should have been, something had been building for a very long time, building and building and building, and the throne was just the shape it had taken. She climbed the dais. The pack watched. Kyle watched from his knees. Asha stood at the back of the hall with her staff and her unreadable face. The fire crackled. The seabirds called. Seraphina sat in the bone throne. The world changed. Not dramatically. Not with lightning or thunder or the earth splitting open. It changed the way dawn changes the world gradually, and then all at once, a light that was always coming finally arriving. The throne blazed. Silver light poured from the bones, from the joints and the seams and the polished surfaces, and it flowed through Seraphina like a river, finding its course, filling the hollow space inside her, the space where the wolf was supposed to be, and what filled it was not a wolf. It was older, deeper, a presence that was not animal and not human, but something between the original thing, the template from which wolves and alphas and omegas had been carved like figures from a single block of wood. It did not howl. It did not growl. It hummed, a frequency that every wolf in the hall felt in their bones, because it was in their bones, because every wolf was made of this, had always been made of this, and the bone singer was simply the one who remembered. 300 wolves bowed, not because they were commanded, not because their alpha had knelt, because their wolves, every single one, felt the frequency and responded to it the way a compass responds to north, automatically, inevitably, with the simple recognition of something that had always been true. Kyle stayed on his knees. His wolf Fenris, the one with the terrible name, was pressed so flat inside him that it had become almost indistinguishable from his own consciousness, not submitting out of weakness, but settling out of relief, the way a lost thing settles, when it finally finds the place it was looking for. "My queen," he said, and meant it. Not as a title, not as a formality, as a description, the way someone might say, "my north," or "my heartbeat," or "my home." Seraphina sat in the throne of bones she had built in fury and grief in a great hall of dark stone overlooking a harbour she had never seen, surrounded by a pack she did not know, bonded to a king she was only beginning to understand, and she felt for the first time in her life the particular sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be. The silver light faded to a steady glow. The hum settled into a baseline frequency that would over time become as familiar as a heartbeat. The pack rose from their bow and looked at her with new eyes, not the eyes of wolves assessing an omega, but the eyes of wolves recognizing an anchor. But the story was not done with her yet. 4 days later, Corrigan came to Blackmane. He came alone, which was either very brave or very stupid, riding a lathered horse through the mountain pass at dusk with a message that he delivered to the gate guards in a voice raw from shouting over the wind. "Harkon has called the border packs to war. He's declared the Bone Singer an abomination. He's marching on Blackmane in 3 days." Kyle received the message in his study, a room lined with books and maps and smelling of leather and the applewood shavings that accumulated around his workbench. Seraphina was there, as she had been every evening since their arrival, sitting in the window seat with a book on pack history that Kyle's chief scholar, an ancient wolf named Mordecai, had pressed into her hands with the zealous insistence of an academic who has found someone willing to read. "How many packs?" Kyle asked. Corrigan stood dripping on the stone floor, his traveling cloak, leaving a puddle of rain and mud. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking, and he flinched every time Seraphina looked at him. 5. Maybe 6. He's been sending riders since you left. He's telling them the Bone Singer is a curse, that she'll enslave their wolves, that the old magic is a corruption. And they believe him? Some do. Some just want the excuse for a fight. The border tensions have been building for years. Harkon is giving them a target. Kyle looked at the map spread across his desk, lines and boundaries, and the spaces between them, the geography of power. "Why are you here, Corrigan?" The beta swallowed. His eyes went to Seraphina, and then to the floor. "Because she could have killed me, in the cellar. When I grabbed her throat, I felt her power go through me like putting your hand in a river in spring when the snowmelt is still coming down, cold enough to stop your heart. And she didn't. She could have, and she didn't." He was shaking harder now, not from cold. "My brother died at the eastern border. It's true. I blamed the old magic, because that's what my father told me. Bone Singers cursed our line, he said. But that night in the cellar when she touched me, I felt my brother. For a second. Just a second. He was there. He was at peace." Corrigan's voice broke. "He was at peace, and I've spent 10 years believing he was suffering." Seraphina set down her book. "The Bone Singers speak for the dead," she said. "They don't curse them. I know that now." Corrigan wiped his face with the back of his hand. "So I'm here. I'll fight for you. I know this territory, and I know Harkon's tactics, and I know where the border gaps are. Use me or send me away, but I won't fight for a man who made me believe my brother was in pain when he wasn't." Kyle studied him for a long moment. The amber eyes were unreadable. Then he looked at Seraphina, and the question was in his gaze. She nodded. "Stay," Kyle said. "Asha will debrief you. If you're lying, she'll know, and what she does to liars is worse than what I'd do." Corrigan left with Orsha. The door closed. Cale crossed to the window seat, took the book from Seraphina's lap, set it aside, and sat facing her. "War. Yes. Because of me. Because of Harkon. You're just the excuse. People will die. People will die regardless. Harkon has been pushing toward war for years. At least this way they'll die for something real. Is that supposed to comfort me? No. It's supposed to remind you that you didn't start this. A man who put his boots on your back started this. A family that murdered bone singers started this. You just survived long enough for the truth to surface." She looked at the rain streaking the window. The harbor below was grey and churning. The seabirds had gone quiet. "I want to help." "You will. Not from the window seat. I want to be on the field." His jaw tightened. The wolf pressed forward. She could feel it, protective and possessive, and absolutely opposed to the idea of its mate anywhere near a battlefield. "No. You can't order me to stay behind. I'm the Alpha King. I can order anyone to do anything. You can order anyone else. You told me yourself. The bone singer sat at the center, not behind the lines, at the center." He stared at her. She stared back. The bond hummed between them, complex and layered, and through it she could feel his fear. His real fear, not for his kingdom or his warriors or his throne, but for her the specific terror of a man who has waited 32 years to find something, and now faces the possibility of losing it. "If I lose you, you won't. You can't know that." "I can't, but I know what I felt when I sat in the throne, and I know what the dead told me when the bones sang, and they told me I was made for this, not for war, but for the thing that comes after war, for putting the bones back together." He was quiet for a long time. "The center of the formation," he said finally, "behind the vanguard, with the throne. Asha will guard you with 50 of her best. The throne. If it's what I think it is, it's the most powerful weapon we have. Not to kill, to communicate, to reach the wolves on the other side, to remind them what the old frequency feels like. You want me to sing. I want you to do what you do. Build, connect, speak for the dead, and hopefully make some of those wolves reconsider whose side they're on." 3 days. They had 3 days. Kyle spent them in the war room with Orsha and Corrigan, mapping Harkon's approach, positioning his forces, sending riders to the allied packs that might be persuaded to join, or at least stay neutral. The stronghold hummed with preparation. Armor was forged. Weapons, sharpened wolves, ran the borders in shifts. Seraphina spent them in the great hall with the throne. She worked the way she had always worked, with her hands, with bone and wire, and the old words. But now she worked with an understanding that she hadn't had in the cellar. She knew what the hum was. She knew what the glow was. She knew that when she touched the bones and spoke the old words, she was not praying or building or creating. She was connecting, plugging into a frequency that predated the packs, a network of bone and memory, and the accumulated wisdom of every wolf who had ever lived and died and returned to the earth. She reinforced the throne, strengthened the joints, added new elements, small bones she had found on the beach below the stronghold, whale vertebrae, worn smooth by the seagull skulls light as paper. Each one she incorporated with the old words, and each one added a new voice to the chorus. By the 3rd morning, the throne no longer needed a cellar to glow. It blazed in the great hall like a second hearth, silver white and warm, and every wolf who entered the hall felt it, the settling, the grounding, the old frequency, reminding them of something they had forgotten, they knew. Harkon arrived at noon on the third day. He came from the south, through the mountain pass, 6 packs, marching in loose formation behind him. It was not an army by traditional standards. Fewer than 1,000 wolves, total many of them, reluctant, press-ganged by their alphas into a conflict they didn't fully understand. But 1,000 wolves is 1,000 wolves, and the Blackmane territory had never been attacked from the south before. Kyle met them on the plain below the stronghold, 300 Blackmane warriors and their wolves arrayed in a crescent formation. He sat on his warhorse at the center, in full armor. His wolf Fenris, a shadow at his side, so large it blocked the midday sun. Seraphina sat on the bone throne. It had been carried out of the great hall and placed at the center of the Blackmane formation on a platform of dark wood flanked by Asher's 50 guards. It looked in the open air and the cold autumn light like a relic from another age, a fragment of the old world dropped into the new one, like a stone into still water. She could feel the wolves, all of them. Not just the Blackmane pack, but the ones across the field, the approaching army, 1,000 wolves with 1,000 heartbeats, and 1,000 wolves inside them, each one carrying the old frequency, whether they knew it or not. Harkon rode to the front of his force. He was in armor, a polished steel that caught the sun, and he looked from a distance impressive. Up close, Seraphina suspected the impression would be different. The steel was new, but the man inside it was old and tired and afraid. "Alpha King," Harkon called across the field. "Surrender the abomination, and this ends peacefully." "Come and take her," Kyle said. The armies advanced, and Seraphina began to sing. Not words, not a melody. The old frequency, the one the throne had taught her, the one that lived in the bones and the blood and the hollow space inside her, that was not a wolf but was the thing wolves were made from. She opened her mouth and let it come, and it came not loud, not forceful, but vast, spreading across the field, like dawn spreading across a landscape, reaching every wolf, every bone, every buried memory of what the packs had been, before they were hierarchies and territories and wars. The effect was not instant. It was not dramatic. It was in a way the most natural thing she had ever done. The first wolf on Harkon's side stopped running, then another, then 3 more, then a dozen. They stopped and stood, confused, their ears flat, their tails tucked, not in submission, but in recognition. They knew this sound. Their bones knew it. It was the frequency of the thing that had made them the original signal, the mother frequency, and it was telling them in a language older than words that this fight was wrong. Not all of them stopped. Some had been too deeply conditioned, too loyal to their alphas, too far gone into the adrenaline of the charge. They kept coming. The battle was joined. Steel met steel. Wolves clashed on the flanks, but the charge had been broken. The momentum was gone. Instead of 1,000 wolves slamming into 300, it was maybe 400 against 300 and 400 against 300, with the Alpha King and his Blackmane guard, is a fight that has only one outcome. Kyle fought the way Seraphina built, with precision, with economy, with a focus that excluded everything unnecessary. His sword moved in arcs that seemed almost lazy until they connected, and then they were anything but. Fenris flanked him, a dark mass of fur and teeth that moved as an extension of its human rather than a separate entity. The battle lasted less than an hour. Harkon's forces broke, scattered. The wolves who had stopped at Seraphina's frequency sat in the middle of the field like dogs who had suddenly remembered they were not supposed to be chasing cars. Their human forms emerged confused and shaking, looking at each other, and at the throne, and at the woman sitting in it, as if they had just woken from a long sleep. Lycan himself fought to the end. He came for Seraphina. Of course he did. That was always the plan, the real plan, beneath the politics and the speeches about abomination. He had always known what she was. His grandfather had known. His father had known. And every Ashwood Alpha for 600 years had known that somewhere in their territory the Bone Singer's bloodline persisted, and if it ever awakened, their claim to power would be revealed for what it was: a theft. He cut through 2 of Osha's guards before the commander herself stepped in his path. Her staff met his sword with a crack like a tree splitting. She drove him back 3 paces, 4, 5, and then Cale was there on foot, having dismounted, and Lycan was between them. He chose Kyle. The fight was brutal and short. Lycan was a capable warrior, trained and experienced, but Kyle was the Alpha King, and the Alpha King fought with 32 years of loneliness and 3 days of protective fury, and the particular ferocity of a man who has just found the thing he was made for, and will destroy anything that threatens it. Lycan went down hard, Cale's sword at his throat. The field was silent, except for the low, steady hum of the throne. "Yield," Kyle said. Lycan lay in the mud, and the blood his armor dented his face, cut his eyes fixed on Seraphina. And in those eyes she saw it. The thing she had been told to look for, but hadn't believed she would find. Not hatred. Not rage. Grief. My grandfather told me stories about the Bone Singers when I was a boy, Lycan said, and his voice was different now, stripped of bluster, raw and hoarse. He said they were terrible, said their power twisted wolves, made them puppets, stole their free will. I believed him because he was my grandfather, and I was 7. He coughed, blood in it. He never told me they sang. He never told me it felt like coming home. "Yield," Kyle said again, more quietly. "I yield." Lycan closed his eyes. "I yield." It was over. The aftermath was not clean. War's aftermath never is. There were wounded on both sides. There were dead. Seraphina spent the rest of that day and all of the next with the fallen, kneeling beside each one, her hands on their cooling skin, speaking the old words, saying the things the Bone Singer says. Not prayers, not eulogies, connections, bridges between the living and the dead, the bone and the earth, the wolf and the frequency it came from. She did not cry. She did not flinch. She did this with the same steady focus she had brought to the throne in the cellar, bone by bone, joint by joint, until every fallen wolf on both sides had been spoken for. Kyle watched. He did not interfere. He kept the pack at a respectful distance and made sure she had water and food and a cloak against the cold, and he waited. And when she finally rose from the last body and walked toward him, with her hands stained with earth and her silver eyes luminous in the twilight, he opened his arms and she walked into them and pressed her forehead against his chest and breathed. Lycan was taken south, under guard, stripped of his alpha status, by the ancient right of yielding to live out his remaining years in a border settlement where the Ashwood territory met unclaimed land. It was not mercy exactly. It was the Bone Singer's judgment. The dead had spoken through the bones, and the dead said, "Enough blood. Enough." Corrigan was given command of the Ashwood reconstruction. He accepted it with the quiet determination of a man trying to earn back something he had lost. Asha said nothing about any of it, which was Seraphina was learning Asha's version of approval. The claiming ceremony happened on the 7th day. Not because Kyle planned it for the 7th day, but because Seraphina told him she was ready on the 7th day, and he had promised not to force anything. And a promise from the Alpha King was a thing that did not bend. The pack assembled at dusk. The great hall, the fire, the throne now permanently installed on the dais, glowing with its steady silver light. There were no speeches, no elaborate rituals. Kyle stood before her in the hall in front of his people, and Seraphina stood before him in the blue dress from Ashwood that she had kept, because it was the first clean thing anyone had given her. And the bond between them was so loud that every wolf in the hall could feel it, a warm, vast, singing thing that filled the space from floor to ceiling. "Seraphina of the Ashwood Bone Singers," Kyle said, "I claim you as my mate, my queen, the center of my pack, if you'll have me." She looked at him. The scar, the amber eyes, the hands that had made her a comb from applewood and carried a throne of bones across 3 days of mountain road. The wolf behind his eyes that settled when she touched him, that went quiet and still and home. "I'll have you," she said, "but I'm keeping the throne." The almost smile became an actual smile. The first one she had seen. It changed his face entirely, cracked it open the way spring cracketh ice, and the hall erupted, not in polite applause, but in the full-throated howl of 300 wolves acknowledging their queen. He marked her. His teeth at the junction of her neck and shoulder, a sharp, bright pain that dissolved almost instantly into warmth, into the bond, sealing itself, becoming permanent, becoming a thing that no power on earth could undo. She gasped. Her fingers dug into his shoulders. The throne blazed behind them, and the wolves howled, and the seabirds outside the windows screamed their approval to the darkening sky. When he pulled back, his eyes were full gold, the wolf and the man indistinguishable, and his thumb traced the mark on her neck with a tenderness so at odds with the violence of the bite that it made her chest ache. "Mine," he said. "Yours," she agreed, "but also my own. Always." The hall settled, the wolves quieted, the fire crackled, and the throne hummed, and somewhere outside, the last of the autumn light slipped below the horizon, and the stars came out cold and bright and ancient. Seraphina sat in her throne. Kyle sat in his chair beside her, his hand on the armrest closest to hers, their fingers touching. Below them the pack was eating and drinking and beginning the long process of becoming something new, something that had a bone singer at its center and a frequency in its bones, and a future that looked nothing like the past. She looked at his hand, the calluses, the scars, the way his thumb rested against hers, a small point of contact that carried the weight of everything. Then she looked out the window past the fire and the hall and the pack to where the harbor met the sea, and the sea met the sky, and the sky was full of stars. And for the first time in her life, the hollow space inside her was not hollow at all. It was singing.